What do you owe your employer when you go to leave your current position? That's what the debate is here. I'm not picking on this commenter. There were a lot of comments that were like this. If you go watch my stitch, I basically say that you should leave on a good note. You should leave your employer on a good note as often as possible. Now, I understand there are going to be some situations of harassment and some other things that are going on, and everybody's situation is different. I get it. And there are some people who are saying, well, it's service industry versus corporate, it's career versus crap job. Like, there are different variations, but here's the thing. When I resign from a position, I work very hard to make sure that I leave it on a good note. I do this for many reasons. One, I want a good reference. Two, if I ever have to go back to that employer, I want to know that I can go back to that employer. Three, I want to make sure that if in the future anything ever happens and I run across one of those people that I worked with before, maybe my old boss, whatever the case may be, I want to make sure that we are on good terms to work together again. Your former boss might one day become your boss again. You just never know. If you leave your job on a bad note and you don't transition your workload, you don't give appropriate notice, and you screw over your coworkers, you might have to work with them at a different company in the future, and they're going to remember how you made them feel when you left. So I still stand by what I said. As often as possible, again, unless there's some sort of like harassment or something going on, you should really work to leave your job in the best way possible. Transition your workload. Give them the time that they need, like 2 weeks, to make sure they know that you're leaving and they have time to make plans for what they're going to do. I get there are a lot of people who are like, no, you don't owe your employer anything. But you want to make sure that you can walk away from a job with your head held high and that you can walk away from that job without any regrets. When I was in my very young 20s, I was working hotel housekeeping. Most of the people that I was working with were high on the clock. Most of the staff was selling drugs in the parking lot. Some of the housekeepers were even sleeping with guests on the clock. My boss would go around stealing tips. Things were stolen from guests' rooms. It was one of the most toxic work environments I have ever worked in. There was one day I hit a breaking point. I couldn't handle it anymore. I slid a note under the general manager's door and said, I'm done. Now, between the drugs, the sex, the theft, the harassment, all of the things that were going on, that's how I left. And at the time I was like, I'm justified. I look back on it now with a lot of regret. And it was a housekeeping job. There were a few coworkers that I was friends with, and it screwed them over when I left that way because they had to pick up my slack. I hated that job. Hated it. It was so toxic. But I still regret how I left. I wish I had given my 2 weeks and I wish I stuck it out. I'm not saying everybody has to do that. I'm not saying that everyone has to stick that kind of crap out. What I am saying is that you might look back on that situation in 5, 10, 15 years and really regret it. I understand that I'm saying this now from a pretty privileged point of view, but I have worked some very awful jobs, and this is just my opinion. So take it for what it's worth.